Hi, this is PatZi with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And I am so thrilled today that I have with me again Simon Tolkien, and it's an honor. I love this book. No Man's Land is so good. I've gone through such a range of emotions as I've read this book. And I want to tell you, in England, we often use the word brilliant, and we say something's brilliant. And this is really, truly brilliant. It is so wonderful. It is an amazing book. And sometimes in life, you come across a book that changes your perspective, changes your attitude, or gets into your soul, and you can never forget it. And I think this book is one of those. And people, when you read this book, you will find so many amazing things. I have colored markers, all sorts of
Ah,
colored markers. And then I ran out of colored markers and I just ripped up an envelope. I said, I have to mark this because it is just so very good.
thank you, Patsy. I'm really glad you like it.
I love it. It's more than liking because it is so rich. And it came to me as such a surprise. Of course, I've read a lot of World War One books. I read anything really that has Churchill even mentioned in it. When I got this book, I didn't know other than that it's going to be a World War One book, but it's so much more than that. This is an epic of not just a family, but in a way of England, the heart of England, the men, the boys who went to war in World War One. It's so rich, and when they talk about painting a picture, you paint pictures that you take us to places like Islington in those days. Of course, today
Mm,
Islington is it's posh. It's posh, but it
mm.
wasn't posh in those days. And so we're going to
No.
talk about that. And of course, going going to the mine, the coal mines. I haven't read anything like that since Emile Zola's Germinal.
Yeah.
That's I remember that book so well. And then, of course, to the war. But it's not just about the war, it's about so much more. And one of the things I kept saying to myself, every mother should read this book because really, this is a book about people in a way that will touch your heart. But particularly, you write the women so well, but how you bring in the mothers of these soldiers is beautiful. You must be excited about the release of this book.
Yeah, I wrote it a long time ago, Patsy. I
I
wrote it
I
9 years
know,
ago.
but
Finished it,
no,
and I wanted it to. I got my new books about the Spanish Civil War being published by Amazon Publishing, and I feel like they're reaching a lot more readers, and so I wanted to relaunch No Man's Land to ensure that all those readers were able to get to it as well. So it is exciting. It's got a different cover. It had I think you've got it there on the screen. Before it had the cover, which was featuring the war, but you only actually get to the war. I'm not exactly sure how far. It's about 2/3 of the way through the book.
yes.
As you rightly highlight the mines, I wanted to have a different design which kind of highlighted that effect. And I think this cover really works really well. That mine world, the village, the slag heap over the village, and then beyond this, what is in fact the headstock, but it's looks like something from like outer space. But it's very ominous, I think, and I think that encapsulates what Adam feels, which is that when he gets to that northern town and sees the headstocks, which the headstocks being the device whereby people go up and down the mine in the cage, that he feels a sense of fear because he's naturally claustrophobic about what it represents and also what it's going to represent for his father when if his father has to work down there. So I think he comes to it with fear, but he's also one of these young men who feels that he has to overcome his fear, and so that leads him down the mine. So I'm really pleased with this cover, and I think they did really well with it to,
Yes, I think so
kind of
too.
change the emphasis because the war comes out of the mine.
Yes.
The relationships which dictate what happens in the trenches have been set by what happens in the mine. And this book owes an enormous debt to Lord Kitchener, who was, in a way it doesn't, but I'm joking, but he was the Minister of War when war broke out in 1914. And the British government had a problem because it wasn't able to introduce conscription. So they had an army which didn't do too well in the beginning, and there was the retreat to Mons and all the rest of it. And they had to find ways to mobilize people to volunteer until conscription was brought in. And the book covers that in much later. And the way in which they did this was to create a people's army, a new people's army, by introducing the idea of pals, which meant that groups came from, if you joined a battalion, you were going to guaranteed to be with your pals, to be with your friends. Going to war was not going to be an isolated experience. And the battalions were founded around towns in England. And this obviously had catastrophic results for certain towns in England, an example being the town of Accrington in Lancashire, because when it came to the 1st of July and the great attack on the Somme, which is the centerpiece of this book, certain battalions were put in the front line. And as we all know, they were mown down by the German machine guns as they left their trenches. And this had catastrophic effects for certain towns in England, from which I don't think they've ever really recovered. So that framework meant that the people that Adam got to know and live with and relate to in different ways in that town in the north of England were the people that he went to war with. And the war is an intensification of those relationships which were already existing.
That's why the book is, as I said, it's so rich, because we start off with learning about Adam as a child in Islington, and we'll talk about that. When we get to the war part, that's where it breaks our heart. That's where some of it is just heartbreaking, because I'm reading the book and there's the war, you're getting to the war part, and somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to die. You're hoping not all of them, but
Who's it going to be?
Hoping not your favorite character or one of your favorite characters. And I got to page 422, and you don't say who you let die in page 422, but I was raging like you were a murderer.
Yeah.
You killed him. I said, you can't kill him. And I wanted to go back. Wanted you to go back and don't kill him.
422.
422, one of my favorite people. Yeah. He had to die for the book, for the sake of the book.
Well, to many people, he's.
But
see, the problem with going down this line is
I don't want to tell people. It'll be a surprise when they get to it, because
many people's favorite character.
I think you relate to different characters too, as you might compare somebody to somebody in your life, or somebody in your family. I come from really a family of miners, not coal miners, copper miners.
I didn't know that, PatZi.
But from northern Michigan. It's called copper country. And they had the same things. The miners there were mining houses owned by the company, and the people didn't own them, and they lived row after row of the exact same house. The only difference was some of the women planted pansies and daffodils, and some of them were lazy, and they didn't. But the same thing. A mining town is the same, I think, worldwide, because the mining company controls it, and that's it.
Yes, and because everybody is involved in it, and because of the fear and risks involved in that life, and the hardness of it, and the toll it takes on the miners' bodies.
And the danger, the constant danger.
But if you go back to 1912, the safety conditions were very poor.
Horrendous.
And one of the major issues in no man's land is that this mine has been mined for a very long time. So it's on its last legs. And as they go deeper and deeper, and as the owner has less and less money, the danger increases because the safety is reduced, and the depth itself creates more and more problems for gas explosion.
Well, there are so many things I love about the story. Of course, I want to get to the part. We'll introduce a little bit more about Adam Raine and about his life in his early part of his life. And then I want to get to Scarborough because I know Scarborough very well. And I was
Oh, really?
pleased.
Mm,
Oh, of course, because that's where Anne Bronte died.
mm,
And I follow in the Bronte footsteps. Wherever they've been, I've been probably. So, of course, that's where she died. And of course, Churchill was there. And I also follow in Churchill's footsteps. But let's talk a
mm.
little bit about Adam. Where did you came out with this character? Now, you don't have a mining background yourself,
No.
but maybe we'll put this in a little bit of perspective for the listeners and watchers who might not know, but World War One started in 1914 and it ended at 11 o'clock on 11/11,
Mm,
1919. So that's why we're having this interview today, because at 11 o'clock British time, I was thinking about England and had a few tears in my eyes because I love my time in England. And then we're going to be talking about the Battle of Somme, as you said, which was 141 days, and that's where your grandfather was. So just for people to know about that, and then you can talk about just about. Uh, let's talk about the beginning, how you started with Adam, and the
I'm not. I'm not sure. It's like my more recent book that we discussed as well. It's a coming of age story. So all I can deduce from that is one, I found that framework a helpful way in to writing this kind of novel, in the sense that the young man is both growing up and experiencing the things for the first time. And I think I was interested in that growth of experience. I think also I'm interested in the process of growing up, always have been, and that's why I think all my last books have used this as a setting. I had been interested in writing a book about the First World War from quite a long time before, at least 10 years before. I took my son on a trip, a very interesting trip to the battlefields there, and in, I think, 2005. And that had a profound effect on me, seeing the cemeteries. But also, it was possible in certain areas to see how the battles had gone on and what had been involved in the strategies. And so I started out to, or considered, I wrote a synopsis of a First World War book, I suppose about 7 years before I actually began writing No Man's Land. But then it wasn't taken up and it was set aside. And I think that was a really good thing for me because I wrote 3 more books and I think that honed my writing style. And then I was very interested in the war. But as I was saying earlier, I also then came to see that it was really important and the book would be much better if there had been an experience of life before the war. So we were invested in the characters before the war. And that's what took me to the mines. And I also, in relation to the mines, wanted Adam, the main character, to be an outsider. I'm always interested in the idea of somebody who is an outsider, who doesn't fit, particularly as this makes the relationships that he forms with the sons of the miners so important, because it's against what expectations, because he comes into the town as a boy from London who is from the outside, and he goes to the local grammar school and he doesn't go to the same school as them, and they pick up on the fact that his father doesn't want him to go down the mine but wants him to have a different kind of experience, and his mother had been taught him at home and he has an academic future and all that, so he's different, but at the same time, and he values that, and he values what he's received from his mother, who dies very early on in tragic circumstances in London. But at the same time, he wants to relate to the people among whom he's with. So it is conflicted in that sense. And the book is really about being an outsider, but the ties that he then forms with the miners' sons become so intense in the trenches. But there is always this sense that those ties in themselves were unlikely. And also in the trenches, because he is an education and he has gone to university, he's put in charge of them and he becomes a corporal, and that adds an extra layer to the different way in which he relates to these boys of his own age. So I think it's very much a book about how you relate to people of your own age in different and extreme circumstances.
What I love about it, as I said, the richness of it. You are just so great with words. So you write so fluidly, and what is lovely is that you have so many things in it that I gravitated to. Whether it's
Mm.
writing about trees, for example, and I love that. I love when you paint a picture by using trees, and when we first see the mine owner's house, and you describe it, I felt like I was standing there, and I was seeing it. I was seeing the elms. I was seeing the row of cypress trees. It
But I
just
think that, Patsy, there's a real contrast. And I was talking about being an outsider too. There's a real contrast in Scarsdale, which is this fictional Northern England town, between the mine owner, who is an English aristocrat, Sir John Scarsdale, and he's living in a pretty substantial country house with a big estate and a lake, and his family have lived there for generations. And that sense of tradition is incredibly important to him and to his family. And then over the hill is, as you've described from your relatives in Michigan, it's a completely different world. These like tiny box-like houses radiating out from the headstocks, and this totally urban, desolate world surrounding the mine, and the way in which the mine has, in a certain sense, ravaged the landscape as well. So they are two different worlds meeting. And where this becomes interesting as well is that is the class divide. It's not, there's a geographical divide between the country house and the mining village in Scarsdale, and it reflects the class divide, which at that time, as the working class in England were becoming more and more radicalized and unionized, and when Adam goes north, his father goes north and has got the job because he is known and has a reputation outside London, which has come to the attention of his cousin in Scarsdale as a very militant trade unionist who's prepared to fight really hard for the men. And the miners are extremely radicalized. And within them, there's this man, Wayland Dawes, who's one of my favorite characters, who really believes in the class struggle. And this ultimately leads, after an explosion in the mine in which a number of people die, to a situation in which the miners march on the country house. And there is the two sides of the village, of the town, and the two sides of the class divide come into violent contact with each other. And it is out of that event that Adam's life is changed. And as one might expect, he then also finds himself living inside the country house. And how does that affect his relationship with the boys in the town? And what do the people in the country house think of this person who's come from the mining village? So it's all about division and isolation and being an outsider and not fitting in. And I think that those feelings, I never went to war, but those feelings were rooted in my experience of growing up in England in the late 60s and early 70s. When I was a boy, I left Oxford and went with my mother to a small village outside Oxford. And I went to school in Oxford, so we would commute backwards and forwards. And I felt very isolated in the village. Obviously, that was more probably in my head than in reality. And then I went away to a boarding school, run by Catholic monks in a part of England called Somerset, deep rural England. And there was really strong, angry feeling between the boys in the village who had a kind of dead end situation and the boys that were going to the college, boys that were going to the school. And for a period, I was staying in a house in the village. And if you walked through the village, you were at risk of attack. So this sense of a class divide in England was very strong to me in a visceral way. And I think it contributed to how I framed and the things that I was interested in No Man's Land.
Oh, it's very in England, the class divide is, I think it's still there. Now, of course,
Not in the same way, I don't think.
no,
It
no,
was
not as
very
bad,
strong
not
back
as
then.
bad. And I hope that sort of people have learned their lesson. But one of the things, of course, being an American, I got treated differently, thank goodness.
I think it's the same thing I feel in America. I feel the land of the free. I feel free because I don't fit into anything. Everybody accepts you. But in England, I felt strongly that I was being labeled as this or as that, and that I didn't fit in. And I had that sense of being an outsider. And it's not that I was trying to write about the same things. There's no school of this kind of no man's land. But I think that sense of being an outsider was something I really wanted to explore in this book. And I think it adds to the power of the book because it was a
Oh, it
visceral
does.
experience for me as an
It's
only child, too.
It certainly does. Of course, your background is so much different from the miners, but I'm glad that you mentioned Rodden. I love Rodden.
Yes.
I don't know if you knew somebody like him or how you, but I love it because also his dialogue is written with a touch of the Yorkshire, no, not using the word the. So I love the way you write him.
I
And
spent a lot of time working on the dialogue because I wanted it to be authentic, but I didn't want to take it to the level where I felt that my 21st century audience would not be able to
yeah,
understand what was being
yeah,
said. So, some level of balance. The book which helped me enormously, and the book to which I have the greatest debt in relation to No Man's Land, is D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers, which the mining father in that, Walter Morell, I studied in great depth how he spoke and also how the Nottinghamshire village worked. And I got a great deal from that in terms of language. As far as Rawdon is concerned, Rawdon, for your listeners, is an interesting character because I was talking about the divide he feels when he goes north to Scarsdale as a London boy and as an outsider. And Rawdon is the most hostile, partly also because he's the son of Wayland, who I referred to, who is the most radical of all the person, completely invested in class warfare. And Rawdon is deeply suspicious and antagonistic to him. And Rawdon also has had misfortune, which is interesting because one of the ways that you could get out and find a different life back in those days in 1912 would be to become a professional soccer player because England was crazy about soccer, particularly in the north of England. And Rawdon was very good at soccer, but he injured himself. And so he has had that disappointment landed on it as well. And so they start off as enemies.
well,
And what I like in the book is the idea of enemies becoming friends.
there are so many twists and turns of the characters. The characters change, some develop, some get worse.
Mm.
And when I was mentioning the mothers, whether it's starting as we said in the beginning, Adam's mother died when he was relatively young, but each mother in A Mother's Son, they touch your heart. And then there's some mothers that you say, I don't want a mother like that. So you have the gamut there of mother types, and I think it's fascinating.
Yes, they're all very different. I agree. And he falls in love with the parson's daughter. And that was a difficult. She was confined. She was a person by her nature, loyal to her parents, and therefore confined by her circumstances. And in order to reach Adam, it required going beyond her situation. And that was very difficult. but it is a process of liberation and self-realization which goes on through the book. But the book needs to be authentic. As a historical fiction writer, you have to write true history, or otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And Miriam, women in those days were in a very constricted and confined role. Their ability to lead lives of their own was unimaginably less. And so that's the situation. But the difficulty in writing that is that the character can't really be, for quite a substantial part of the book, dynamic and independent, because they are as a result of their situation. And it comes into the book. This is the era of the suffragettes. They talk about it at that very time. So it's that process of self-realization and liberation, but it also touches on the whole issue of what happened in the First World War when all the men went away and the women stayed home. It was a men's war, and there weren't women at the front. And so there was a complete gap of experience because between those who were left behind and those who were at the front. And the people at the front obviously wanted to sanitize what they were experiencing for the people at home. The people at home, therefore, didn't really understand what was happening. And this gap is very much feeds into how their relationship develops, and this sense that he feels that by continuing the relationship, he is spreading the filth of the war onto her. And this sense of guilt, and the sense of guilt of being away from his friends and of his loyalty to his friends. And this has profound effects on their relationship and how it founders.
It's so strange for Americans, both for World War One, World War Two. The war was over there; it was far away. But
Right.
when you look at it, when you're in Europe and you're in England, really, it's so close. You're not far away. They can take leave from the front and go home. It's crazy in a way. We, as Americans, we didn't have people coming home for leave in the middle of the war. But they are at the front in the worst possible place you can be. But they might get a leave to go home for a few days. It's only a 2-hour flight by Cessna from London.
You could hear from on the Kent coast, you could hear the guns across the channel. So absolutely. And it's also an extraordinary war because it was the first war in which people were writing. They were writing letters, they were writing diaries. There's an enormous trove of first-hand material that I was able to draw on to get a sense of what life was like in the trenches. I'm always interested as a historical fiction writer. My great interest is what was life like?
Well,
What was the experience like? And a lot of the trenches were just being in trenches with bombardment, but you weren't going over the top. You were just being in them and what life was like in that context.
It's amazing how many authors were in the war, were right there in the trenches. Not just your grandfather, but so many other authors were there. Some died and some survived. And I had never quite put it together. The one that sort of clicked on me, I knew in the back of my mind that your grandfather was there at the same time as A. Emile. So we had the two writers of books for young people there. And I'm sure there were many other authors there who didn't survive. We've never heard about them. They would have been authors, but they were lost.
I think my grandfather's experience was something which was of great interest to me. And anybody who lived in England back in the time when I was growing up, the war memorials were extraordinary. Every village, and I lived in rural Oxfordshire, there would be a war memorial and it would be covered in names. In the small town where I lived, called Watlington, there was a family that had lost 7 of their children. 7 names on this war memorial. And tiny villages with all these lists of names. The effect is just unimaginable. And also of communities where nobody had ever really left until this had happened. So the consequences were overwhelming. And I think that really hit home to me about about the overwhelming effect of the war on the country, and also on the idea that you had to go, and and increasingly it was becoming seriously likely that you would either die or be maimed in the process. And the effect on very young people who feel so alive is something I was really interested in and wanted to bring to life. And within No Man's Land, there is this dichotomy between Adam and, if you like, the bad, I don't think villain is a good word, but the kind of rotten younger son who is his rival for Miriam, called Bryce. And the book follows Adam, and it's his coming of age story, but also at points it branches off and follows Bryce. And I wanted with Bryce to try and create a picture of not just somebody who was mean and awful, but also was in a certain sense, at one level, sympathetic, because he is so frightened and he is able to evade going, but he's given white feathers. The white feathers were given by women to people who hadn't gone to fight. And he is just completely terrified of going there. So I wanted to highlight that as well. There's an extraordinary moment which takes us obviously to Scarborough, which is something that you wanted to discuss, which is when Adam has some time to kill and he's in Scarborough and he goes into this cinema, and in the cinema there's the show and he's quite happy and everything, and suddenly the curtain goes up and this lady comes out who's really beautiful and starts to sing one of these songs about patriotism and the war. And behind her, there are all these tables at which people are being signed up to go to war. And she has all these other girls who go through the audience and effectively are, in a certain sense, forcing the people to go up onto the stage and sign up and sign their lives away. So there was constantly this sense of, are you going to go? You should go. We don't want to lose you, but we really think you ought to go. And I'm very interested in that as well.
Yes, recruitment with beautiful women. It's not unknown.
Beyond recruitment, yes,
Yes,
terrifying.
beyond recruitment. Of course, Kitchener played a part in that too because his picture was all over the country about
Yes,
joining.
yes,
But
absolutely.
it
Later, of
really
course, they brought
spurred
in conscription, but
Scarborough really spurred it on because, of course, as I said, I've been there many times, as a matter of fact, stayed at both the Grand Hotel, which is in your book, and the Royal. So, did you go there when you were, had you already been there when you were young? Or,
I've never been to Scarborough. I
oh,
studied it. It was possible to literally Google tour the whole place and read oneself very deep into it. I was able to, through internet research, to find out exactly how the streets worked in relation to each other, what everything looked like, and where everything was. It was not necessary to go there in order to do that, and I felt by the end quite satisfied that I'd been able to get an accurate picture of what the town looked like, and obviously also what occurred there, because your listeners probably don't know this, but the reason why Scarborough features so importantly in the book is because the German Navy attacked Hartlepool, Scarborough, and Whitby in the latter part of 1914, and this had a profound effect on the British population, because before that the war had been over there, to use a phrase that you were there, but now it had actually come home to roost. And the idea that people could be just having tea in their house and were being blown to bits by shells being fired from German cruisers out on the North Sea was extremely upsetting to people, and a propaganda campaign was run called Remember Scarborough, and Scarborough had a strong effect on people on recruitment. But I wanted to capture that extraordinary moment of shock and surprise when the war does actually arrive in that small, sleepy seaside town.
You did capture it, and it is a small, sleepy town, but I love it. And I went there because that's where Anne Bronte died.
Mm.
And right there, the Grand Hotel, which is one of the hotel that was bombed, it was really a shock for England. You might expect an attack on London, but somehow Scarborough, why Scarborough? It's,
Well, there were the Zeppelins, weren't there?
yeah,
But this was much more visceral, and it
yeah,
was a place that people. It was a seaside town.
yeah.
It was a place that went for people went for seaside holidays, and so I think that that sense of war
It
coming to
was
it had a very
surprising.
visceral effect.
And of course, the Grand Hotel is actually was the it was the, at one time the largest hotel in all of Europe.
Very
Amazing,
popular. It's a very
very
popular
popular,
place.
really great, wonderful place to visit. There are a lot of twists and turns. There's
Mm.
one scene that really shook me. There's this cat attack that I knew. I'm terrified of cats, and I thought that was so good. That was like something out of a real horror. Suddenly,
Exactly.
I got so
Mm.
scared. I got so scared. I
Mm.
love that, but that's why this book is so much. It's such a great read. It's so much fun to read. Yes, we have the war, but there's other things in it that I think people will find. Just keep them turning the pages.
The chapter with the cat is a chapter about time. It's when Adam's friend takes him to another mining town, but where the mine became exhausted and the houses are now deserted and it's a ghost town. It's in order, and it's a way for Adam to understand that everything that is there will come to an end, and it's this is the future.
Yeah, it's like in northern Michigan, the mines. That was it. There aren't any mines up there anymore,
Right.
and but you still have these mining towns. Many of them just empty, row after row of empty houses,
Mm.
rotting away. But that's what happens. So you really bring it to life, so to speak, the dead towns too, and with even little things, whether it's a rocking chair that you describe so beautifully.
Yes, exactly. So I remember the rocking chair. So
Yeah,
many details.
it's details. It's details that are great. That's
Mm.
what makes for a book that it's a kind of book that you can read once and actually you'll read again and find more things that you'll say, oh yeah, that one of
This
the
is
things I
why I'm
love.
really excited about the release, because I do feel that my publishers do get the books to a lot of people,
Yeah,
and that's exciting for me because I think that it is a fun book to immerse yourself. It's a fun and it's a very sad book too, but it does enable you to find your
but
way
it's all
back into that period.
it's not just a sad book. It's also a hopeful book. It's a book
Mm.
that celebrates, in a way, goodness and people who are loyal. And there are so many things. Whether it's the cats, or it's funny for me, the you have one where you mention a red kite. I
Mm.
was so happy that for me, now again, some Americans will be reading this book and they'll imagine a red kite on a string
Yes.
being pulled.
Mm.
But of course, I know that it's a bird, and
Mm.
in that you see in England.
It's a village
So
where I came from is famous for them.
yeah,
And
exactly.
there's a dog, Patsy. There is also a
So
dog in the book.
oh yeah,
The was an indulgence because I'm a pug owner. I love pugs, and I have a pug called Sadie. And the lady of the country house, who treats Adam very badly when he goes there, she has a pug, and she's very much absorbed in her pug to the exclusion of everybody else. And in that way, she mirrors the lady in Mansfield Park.
again, everybody, you have all these characters and you describe them, you make them real so that we think they're real. Like the butler will whether it's
There's an element.
work.
There's an element of Downton Abbey about this book,
Yes, yes.
and that's I was obviously very interested in that whole world of of the Downton Abbey, and Scarsdale Hall. It's slightly smaller. Is a Downton Abbey, in which there is strict demarcation lines between the family and the upper classes and the servant classes. And Adam, who basically comes from a working class environment, continually gets this wrong, which his rival, the son of the house, and indeed Lady Anne herself, are quick to seize on and humiliate him with. And this constant play with what is called manners and all that is a very important part of the book. And this idea of upstairs, downstairs. I think what the book does succeed in doing is, in crude terms, working class life and poverty and hardship in that world, aristocratic life in the house, and you see the effect of the war itself. So the book marries all three together, and Adam experiences all of those worlds, different worlds. Changing away from that, I do think that there's nothing autobiographical about No Man's Land, but I think I think it was important to me to write about what my grandfather experienced. And it obviously had a very profound effect on his imagination, as becomes apparent. Anybody who reads The Lord of the Rings, you can see that Mordor in itself, nobody could imagine Mordor without the experience of the Somme goes straight into that. But I wanted to understand his experience as well as the experience of those who fought in the war, in the First World War. And I think I did that. And Adam's experience as well, that experience that my grandfather had, which I've always felt was very intense, that his mother brought him up and homeschooled him and gave him a whole series of values, and then died when he was really young, when he was like 12 years old. That and the effect of that, that's also what happens to Adam, and it has a very profound effect upon him. So I think that my grandfather's experience, and this book is not about my grandfather, it doesn't borrow stuff, but I think I was interested in finding it. And I said in the beginning of the book that I think it honored him, and I think it helped me in relation to coming to terms with my relationship with him. So I think it was a rite of passage for me in that context too.
I
I
think he
felt
would
he'd
be.
been really pleased with it. I
I
felt he
think
would
he
have really,
would be very proud and happy with
yeah,
this.
proud, yeah. But I think he'd have been proud that I turned out to be a novelist. I know that because he immensely valued good fiction. But he'd have been really pleased that I wrote about that and in the way I did. I think he would have been very happy about that.
I think so. I think
So I feel good about that.
you should feel very
Mm,
good about
I
it because
do.
I was thinking about it myself
He's
when
had
I
such
was.
an enormous effect on my life, PatZi, that I do feel like,
But
you know,
he never
brought
talked
to
to you
life
about
a
World War
part of
One.
his experience.
He never talked to you about World War One.
No, God, no. He died
No.
when I was 14. No. The Somme would not be a suitable conversation to talk about with your grandson while you're spinning stones into the English Channel.
No, I know, but like my father didn't talk about World War II, and it didn't matter how old I was.
People
Still,
don't.
I would ask him, try to get him to talk about it, and it would be so few things. What I knew about what he did came from other people, not from him.
And this is a real problem. And it was what I was trying to allude to in relation to what is a very important part of the book, which is the trouble that Adam runs into with Miriam, who's incidentally named after the lady in Sons and Lovers, Lawrence's girlfriend, is because he can't talk about it. She wants to understand, she wants to empathize. She's a very sympathetic person, but he can't articulate it. And this creates a great barrier between them, which is grievous.
Yeah, they never do. But of course, what Adam does at the end, he's writing about.
He's found a way through it. I want to give away stuff in the
No,
story, but
don't give away stuff. I love the Scottish dancing I love that part.
Oh, do you mean as a means of therapy?
Yes, I think that's so good. I didn't know about that. There
Yes,
are some
this
things
was a way of helping people to get over the horrors of war, was to teach them to do Scottish dancing on the beach in France.
I
It's
think it's
amazing, these things. If you dig deep down into research, you find gold. And I feel sometimes like I'm one of those panning for gold. I'm like the gold rush in California or something. And there I am with my sieve, or what do they call them, PatZi, the thing that you shuffle, that you sieve out the dirt. And suddenly there's the gold there. Going through all this material, this marvelous primary material, you get things like that. And it's just
oh,
magnificent.
the minute I read that, I said, okay, this is going to be a scene in the
Mm,
streaming video series, which you're going
right.
to get, because
Mm.
I'm sure they'll make it into a streaming series, which will be
This
great.
is my great hope. And I do think that No Man's Land would make a wonderful TV series. And I do have irons in the fire. And that is my great hope, because I think it divides beautifully into an 8-episode TV series. And I think it could be powerful. And it does have so many ingredients that people are interested in, both the war, as I was saying, and the country house, and the mines and relationships. And I think it really would work in that way. So this is something I've got great hope for. I think more than any other of my books, it's suitable for TV.
Oh, it will be fantastic. I'm sure they're going to pick it up. I
We
know
gotta hope. We just
no,
gotta hope.
it's
I do
a
have
strange
irons in the
business,
fire,
but
and I hope.
well, I think it's going to happen. And meanwhile, the wonderful thing about it is that people will get a chance to read the book, because they will
Hmm.
leave so much out of the film, but I want people to read the book so that they
Oh,
can get all the joy of reading it.
I
And
do think it's important, Patsy, that this book is also about, it's about the mines, it's about the country house, but it is also about war. And it's not just about being in trenches. The centerpiece of the book is the terrifying moment when, after a long period of training and preparation, which the book covers, the British Army, or sections of the British Army, go over the top on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. And
it was
that's
devastating. It's
that's
crazy.
the centerpiece of the book, really, is, and
I think
that experience.
that was the worst day,
Right.
that first
And
day.
Adam, unlike so many, and a section of his battalion get across into the German lines.
War is crazy. A few years ago, we would never have believed there would be this major war in Europe again.
Yeah, it's strange.
These people going out there, and it's like the same kind of crazy stuff. They're going across land and they're getting blown up, and
Mm,
it's hard to believe sometimes.
mm.
He didn't learn.
I think they have
Tactics
learned.
drive
I
me
don't think that's
crazy.
entirely fair. I think they have learned, but the war that you're referring to is being carried on by a completely implacable government who just won't stop. I think it's a slightly different situation.
But from both sides,
Hmm.
young people join or are pushed into it, and on one side, on the
Well,
other side,
defending their country, aren't they?
they're doing this same thing.
It's heartbreaking. It's a
I
horrible,
never
horrible, horrible
understood
thing.
how the British Army, people should understand, in the Battle of the Somme, they didn't get very much land out of it. They
No.
progressed so slowly. It's insane.
It was the vast miscalculation which occurred before the Somme, the idea being that you could use artillery to destroy entrenched defenses. And July the 1st, 1916, was showed that to be a fallacy, is that the German concrete trenches were just too strong to withstand that. And the Germans then, there were immense errors made at the beginning. For instance, going in the light and weighing people down with this incredible amount of equipment. And that later, and quite quickly soon after, they developed different kinds of tactics so that you would go behind what was called a barrage, so that you would follow the artillery and the artillery was going at the same time as the advance. But the simple idea on July the 1st was that you could knock out the other side, and it just turned out to be a complete fallacy. And the Germans had watched the preparations, and they knew precisely where the British were going to come from, because they'd seen the places where the British had cut their wire. And so they simply, the machine gun in 1916 was an extremely powerful, accurate weapon. And they were able to just concentrate their fire on these channels to absolutely devastating effect. And thus, no man's land. This is, but what we've really tried to discuss, and what I was been trying to convey as well in this conversation, has been so interesting, is this book is not just about the no man's land between the German and British lines. It's about somebody who, in a variety of different environments and situations, is in no man's land, his own personal no man's land, where he is an outsider, not connected, and how he deals with that. That's why I wanted to change the cover. It was a very conscious decision to change the cover. Before we had soldiers on the cover. Now we've got a mine and a mining environment on the cover. I think that it was because we needed to say more what the book was about, because the book comes out of the mines or that mining village.
And those people it's fascinating. So when you were writing, how long did it take you to write this? It took you a while.
4 years, I think. 4.5 years. No, not to write. 4.5 years to research, I think, roughly. But you also have to bear in mind that when I was also talking, that I had in mind this kind of book much, much earlier. I'm so glad, PatZi, that I didn't write it then. I'd thought about writing this book 10 years before I actually did. And I'd been to the battlefields and I'd done work then. So I had, when I turned to it, I suppose in about 2012, I already had done quite a lot of work already. Into the battlefields in 2005, I believe.
Yeah.
And I had extensive notes and research from that period, because I developed a synopsis. I changed that synopsis when I came back to the idea of writing the book much later. But by that time, I had written more books and I was a much better writer. So I'm really glad that I came to this subject and dealt with this subject when I'd already been writing for a long period of time. So I think I was much more able to cope with this kind of material.
Adam, Raine, and all of the people in the book are so real to me. I can see them in my head, and I know that we're going to see them on film.
Let's hope so. As I say, I do have hope about this, and irons in the fire. I do hope so, because I think it's very realizable on screen. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I feel really good about today, and it's great to talk to you today. It is Veterans Day, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, and you think of the people who died just before the armistice and all that, Wilfred Owen. But
it was that period of time while they waited for 11
dreadful,
o'clock.
yes.
It was dreadful. Over 6,000 died in that. I think they were waiting 5 hours from the time they signed it until they could notify everybody.
One poet, Wilfred Owen, died in 1918, and shortly before the armistice, which is heartbreaking, because his poetry is another, for me, is an extraordinary way into what the experience was like as well. Poems like Dulce et Decorum Est.
They signed the armistice, they signed the peace treaty. It took 5 hours to get the news to the front.
And then they went off to Versailles and made a mess of it. But anyway, today's a good day, because I do feel I love my new publishers, and I think they're going to get this book to a lot more people, and I think a lot more people are going to read it, and that makes me really happy. So it being re-released and released in this way and on the back of the duology, the Palace at the End of the Sea and the Room of Lost Steps, it makes it a good year for me, and I think a year in which a lot more people are reading what I write, which is, if you're an author, that's what you care about, is you want people to read what you write. It's wonderful, because I think that's now happening. I'm very grateful, because shows like yours make that possible as well. So thank
you again for joining me. And there's your website. People can go there and find out more about you. But everybody get this book.
Absolutely.
You'll love it. I love it. And it's No Man's Land. And it is available today, starting today, November 11th. Wow.
It's been a great pleasure, PatZi. I've really, as always, really enjoyed talking. And I'm love all your insights into the book and, how much you enjoyed it and everything. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye now. Bye.
Thanks.
Simon Tolkien's No Man's Land, a world on the verge of war. A message from Joy on Paper Live's host, PatZi. Help us help authors. A coming-of-age story. Just click that button.